Somewhere between the famous judges of Israel, the ones with daggers, miracles, and burning cities, there are 5 men who ruled the nation for over 70 years combined, and the Bible has almost erased every one of them. Their names are Tola, Jair, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon, and if you have never heard of any of them, you are in very good company. Even seasoned Bible scholars sometimes struggle to list all 5 without opening the text directly. There are no battles tied to most of them, no miracles, no secret daggers, no dramatic assassinations, nothing that would make a thumbnail on its own. For several of these men, the entire biblical record reads almost like a government ledger. How many years they ruled, how many children they had, where their bodies were buried. And yet without them, the story of Israel's judges would have a massive gap that nothing else in the text could fill. Add up their years of rule, and they governed longer than some of history's most studied ancient kingdoms, yet their combined story takes up less space than a single scene of Samson tearing down a temple. The Book of Judges names 12 separate leaders in total, not counting Abimelech, whose violent, self-declared kingship the text treats more like a national embarrassment than a legitimate reign. Of those 12, only 6 receive full narratives with dialogue, tension, and drama: Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson. The other 6 barely get a paragraph each. Deborah, the only female judge in the entire book, might be the sharpest possible contrast to these 5 men. Her story includes prophecy, battle, a cowardly general, and an assassination with a tent peg. Comparing Deborah to Tola or Elon makes one thing obvious: the space the Bible gives a judge has nothing to do with how long he ruled, and everything to do with how dramatic his story happened to be. The Book of Judges runs on a repeating cycle. Israel sins, God allows foreign oppression, the people cry out, and a deliverer rises to bring peace. But between those dramatic cycles, someone still had to govern during the quiet years, and that is exactly where these 5 men step in. To understand why they appear exactly when they do, you have to remember what came right before them: the short, bloody reign of Abimelech, son of Gideon. Abimelech crowned himself king, murdered 70 of his own brothers on a single stone, and ruled through terror for only 3 years before dying in humiliating fashion, his skull cracked by a millstone thrown by a woman from a tower. After that family massacre and internal chaos, Israel needed something completely different. Not another conqueror, but simply someone capable of holding things together. The first of the 5 is Tola, son of Puah, from the tribe of Issachar. Strangely enough, the name Tola literally means worm or scarlet in Hebrew, and Puah is tied to a red dye, 2 names that sound more suited to textile workers than to national leaders. Judges says Tola rose up to save Israel right after the chaos and bloodshed of Abimelech, the self-crowned king who slaughtered his own brothers. After that violence, somebody needed to restore a sense of order, and that somebody was Tola. He lived in Shamir, in the hill country of Ephraim, and from there he judged Israel for 23 years. That is essentially everything we know about him. 23 years of leadership compressed into barely 2 verses in the entire Bible. He died and was buried in Shamir, the same place he had governed, quietly closing a chapter that followed a period of brutal internal violence. It is worth noting that a man from the tribe of Issachar governed from territory belonging to Ephraim, suggesting his authority somehow crossed traditional tribal boundaries. The second judge is Jair, from the region of Gilead on the far side of the Jordan River. Jair ruled for 22 years, and the Bible gives us a far stranger detail about him than it did about Tola. He had 30 sons, and those 30 sons rode on 30 donkeys, a clear symbol of wealth and status in that era. In the ancient Near East, owning your own donkey instead of borrowing or sharing one was a genuine marker of elevated social standing, similar to owning a horse in later centuries. On top of that, His sons controlled 30 towns in the land of Gilead, collectively known as Havoth Jair, which literally means the villages of Jair. 30 sons, 30 donkeys, 30 towns. The number repeats with an almost poetic precision, as if the text wanted to record an unusually specific kind of prosperity. The name Jair itself roughly means he enlightens or he awakens, an almost prophetic name for a man who brought 2 decades of stability after Abimelech's chaos. There are no recorded wars during his rule, no foreign oppression, just enough stability for 30 sons to govern 30 towns without any apparent conflict. Jair died and was buried in Kaman, closing one of the quietest and most prosperous stretches in the entire book of Judges. But peace never lasts forever in this book. After Jair, Israel again did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They worshipped the Baals, the Ashtoreths, the gods of Syria, Sidon, Moab, Ammon, and the Philistines, abandoning once more the God who had freed them from Egypt. The punishment arrived as Ammonite and Philistine oppression, 18 years of suffering that eventually led to the rise of a new leader, Jephthah. Jephthah's story, and especially the story of his unnamed daughter, is dramatic enough to deserve its own dedicated video, already told on this channel. Jephthah judged Israel for 6 years, and when he died, he was buried in one of the towns of Gilead, leaving leadership vacant once again. Some scholars point out that the remaining 3 minor judges appear right after Jephthah rather than all together at the start, suggesting a deliberate literary structure splitting the 5 minor judges into 2 groups around one major dramatic story. And it is right after Jephthah that the other 3 nearly forgotten judges appear: Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon. Ibzan was from Bethlehem, though scholars still debate whether this was the famous Bethlehem of Judah or a separate town by the same name in the territory of Zebulun. About Ibzan, the Bible gives us something even more specific than it gave about Jair. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He married his 30 daughters outside his own clan and brought in 30 women from outside for his 30 sons, in what looks like a deliberate strategy of family alliances. 60 arranged marriages, 60 bloodlines extended into other families and possibly other tribes, all engineered under the rule of one single man. Some later Jewish commentators went so far as to identify Ibzan with Boaz, the very man who appears in the book of Ruth as a direct ancestor of King David. If that identification is correct, this nearly anonymous judge would hold a surprising place in the genealogy that eventually leads to David himself. Other scholars reject that identification outright, citing chronological problems, since the timeline does not always line up neatly between the era of the judges and the story of Ruth and Boaz. Ibzan judged Israel for 7 years, died, and was buried in Bethlehem, leaving behind a web of family alliances that likely outlived him by generations. Next came Elon, from the tribe of Zebulun, about whom the Bible tells us even less than it told us about the others. No sons, no towns, no donkeys, just the fact that he judged Israel for 10 years. Zebulun was one of the northern tribes, with territory near the Sea of Galilee, a fertile region that was also exposed to trade routes and therefore to outside influence. He died and was buried in Aijalon in the land of Zebulun, and that is the entirety of what Scripture considered worth telling us about him. 10 years of leadership over an entire nation, compressed into a single verse with no adjectives, no achievements, no named battles. The last of the 5 is Abdon, son of Hillel, from Pirathon in the land of Ephraim. And with Abdon, the text once again offers us strange specific numbers, almost as if the author enjoyed documenting the material prosperity of these minor rulers. Abdon had 40 sons and 30 grandsons, and all of them rode on 70 donkeys, 70 pack animals for 70 direct descendants, an image of abundance that stands in sharp contrast to the famines and wars found elsewhere in the book. in royal inscriptions from other ancient Near Eastern cultures, listing large numbers of sons and pack animals was a common form of political propaganda, a way of demonstrating divine favor over a ruler. It is possible these brief biblical verses follow that exact same cultural pattern, summarizing in plain numbers what other cultures would have carved into stone with far more decoration. Pirathon sat in the hill country of Ephraim, near what the text calls the land of the Amalekites, an old enemy of Israel largely settled or scattered by this point in the story. Abdon judged Israel for 8 years, died, and was buried in Pirathon, in the land of Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. Right after Abdon's death, with no dramatic transition at all, the text jumps straight into the birth of Samson, the most famous and most tragic judge of them all, almost as if the silence of these 5 men was quietly setting the stage for the storm to come. With Abdon's death, the complete list of the so-called minor judges comes to a close. Tola, Jair, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon add up their years of rule, even without counting Jephthah's 6 years in between, and you get roughly 70 years of almost entirely silent leadership. And in the years of the more famous judges too, Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson, and the entire book of Judges spans more than 3 centuries of intermittent history, and a meaningful chunk of those 3 centuries belongs precisely to these 5 men that no sermon quotes and no movie has ever bothered to depict. 70 years inside a book that, in nearly every other chapter, is filled with war, idolatry, foreign oppression, and violent deliverance. It is a fair question to ask, why does the Bible spend entire chapters on Samson's exploits, yet barely 2 verses on men who ruled for decades? Some scholars believe the answer lies precisely in the absence of conflict. These judges never needed a dramatic battle because their era was, quite simply, peaceful. An ancient text rarely stops to narrate the years when nothing catastrophic happens. Peace, by its very nature, does not generate the kinds of stories told for generations. Others read the numbers of sons, donkeys, and towns as an ancient way of measuring a ruler's success. A large family, real wealth, and stable territorial control. Under that reading, Jair, Ibzan, and Abdon are not minor figures at all, but examples of genuinely successful leadership measured by the standards of their own time. It is worth noting that none of these 5 judges were ever directly called by God in a narrated scene, unlike Othniel, Ehud, or Gideon. The text simply says they rose to save Israel, or judged Israel, a phrase that in Hebrew can also refer to a literal judicial function, settling legal disputes between tribes, not only political or military leadership. This has led some readers to wonder whether these men reached power through tribal consensus, inherited family prestige, or some mix of both. Some modern scholars even group these 5 men under the specific label minor judges, deliberately separating them from the major judges who receive full narrative treatment. That distinction never appears explicitly in the biblical text itself, but it has become standard in academic scholarship to explain why some judges get chapters and others barely get a couple of lines. Archaeology has never been able to confirm with certainty the exact location of several of these towns, like Canaan or Pirathon, adding yet another layer of mystery to their biographies. Havoth Jair, Jair's 30 villages, does appear in other passages of the Pentateuch, suggesting that his territorial legacy outlived his own personal story by generations. In other words, even though the man himself was nearly forgotten, the name of his possessions survived in Israel's geographic memory far longer than his own biography did. Something similar may have happened with Ibzan's 60 arranged marriages, though the text never tells us explicitly what became of those 60 newly connected families. Even without that connection, though, the story of these 5 minor judges forces us to reconsider what actually makes a leader important inside the biblical text. They were not legendary warriors. They did not kill kings with hidden daggers or tear down cities guarded by giants the way other judges in this same book did. They simply governed, kept a rough kind of order, raised large families, and died peacefully, buried in the very land they had ruled. For a civilization surrounded by constant warfare, foreign invasions, and repeating cycles of idolatry and punishment, 70 years of relative stability might have been its own quiet miracle. Maybe the real hidden message behind these forgotten verses is not about great heroes at all, but about the rarity and quiet value of periods without crisis. Today, almost nobody remembers the names Tola, Jair, Ibzan, Elon, or Abdon outside of fairly specialized biblical scholarship. Their stories inspire no movies, no songs, no dramatic sermons the way Samson, David, or Moses do. And yet each one of them carried for years at a time the responsibility of holding together a nation that constantly threatened to fall apart. Perhaps the most uncomfortable lesson from these 5 minor judges is that history, both biblical and human, rarely remembers the people who simply do their job well without creating any drama. We remember the storms, the wars, the betrayals, and the spectacular miracles, but we almost completely forget the quiet years when none of that was necessary. Tola ruled 23 years without a single recorded crisis. Jair, 22 years of family and territorial prosperity. Elon, 10 years summed up in a single sentence. Ibzan wove together 60 family alliances in just 7 years of rule. Abdon accumulated 70 descendants and 70 donkeys in only 8 years leading Israel. None of them ever made it onto a list of the Bible's most quoted heroes, and none of them likely expected to. And yet together these 5 men held Israel's social fabric together longer than some of the most celebrated kings in its later history ever managed to reign. Maybe something similar happens in our own lives. The years of stability, steady work, and an absence of disaster almost never get told as stories, even though they are often the years that quietly hold everything else up. The next time someone asks about your hardest year and you have no great storm to describe, that silence does not mean the year never mattered. So the next time you read through the book of Judges and rush past those short verses wedged between one battle and the next, it might be worth slowing down for a moment. Behind every barely readable name, every number of sons or donkeys mentioned without explanation, there was a real man who governed, grew old, and died, knowing his people were still standing. That, perhaps, is the most honest definition of success the Book of Judges ever offers, not surviving a spectacular war, but simply holding the peace together long enough to be forgotten.